week. I never really got into that, so I'm not going to jump into it now. Is it though?
Bring in Chief U.S. Equity Strategist of Citigroup, Tobias Lefkowitz.
They put so much money on the thing, and it is equitable. But I want you to take one more step, 1-0-0 in physics. What are they going to do? What's it make a problem with? Because it's definitely making a problem. You put the money on that, you hit it 2-phase. You play it for long enough on the gap, you'll get a 3-phase
so I think it will.
The
question is, how big are the sell-offs? And we fell, I think, intraday about 3.3% on Friday and Monday last week and this week combined, and I think a lot of people felt that was a terrible angst kind of moment. We're less convinced that they kind of work through this and it's over. There are a number of issues that we got to look at. For example, a lot of people look at bond yield collapse as being some sort of a negative omen about economic activity. But if you look over the past month, for example, TIPS break-evens over the same 10-year time frame really didn't move at all.
I got these
so it wasn't
parts
really an
inside
economic
here.
call or inflation
Critical
call.
thinking on knowing chemistry because I'm locked in some damn janitor's closet and I got to figure out how to melt the lockout inside
noted
here.
Earlier this week that we only had about $84 billion of issuance from the federal government in terms of 10-year bonds, and you have $80 billion of Fed buying. So there's a real shortage of bonds out there, caused some technical buying.
I need bonds right now because I have a Shangri-La build I'm planning, and y'all want it because it's work on the system. Come in, fill out the applications here, stop what you are doing right now before I bury you.
There may be some margin pressures, and even with the good earnings numbers we've seen, so
you're
far in the earnings
going to get it right.
Earnings revision momentum
Some places just don't have the meat on the bone.
But that doesn't really jive with what we saw in the market either, Tobias. We saw cyclical groups like autos and airlines off 20% from their recent highs. Energy stocks also off 20%. Media down 10% from the highs. Some of the commercial banks. That tells you a story of a slowdown, or at least peak growth, which has factored into the conversation at a time where this Delta variant is spreading in the U.S. pretty rapidly, even amongst vaccinated people. You don't buy the slowdown story at all?
I don't buy the slowdown story, and I'll tell you why. When bond yields slip, cyclicals typically do poorly. So tell me the banks are down when bond yields are falling. That happens for the last 25 years. In terms of peak ISM, which I've heard people talk about, I'm a former industrials analyst. The peak of the ISM usually happens 3 years before, or 4 years before the cycle dies.
Yeah,
so
my mountain's about just Everest, right? It's hard out here.
Kind of
if you do not understand the system, how it works, let me explain it to you.
See weakness in bonds,
this is 35.
and in the bond yield specifically, you will see cyclicals underperform, you'll see growth outperform, and that's what's happening in the market. It's pretty reasonable for that activity, and because of the weight of those growth stocks, they tend to push up the index.
One of the purposes it's made for.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube. We're hoping things will pick up by Q3. Yeah. Okay.
What we got? I have my master's. The problem with going through this is you need a few.
I'm Richard Branson, and I have a once-in-a-lifetime invitation.
I love the model.
Would you like to travel to
telling
space?
him you didn't go to college.
Well, I recently flew aboard a
all
Virgin
kinds
Galactic
of the
space
crazy
flight
dumb shit that
alongside
it
an incredible crew, and had the most remarkable experience seeing Earth.
Neural networks are good for learning lots of different types of patterns. To give an example of how this would work, imagine you had a 4-pixel camera.
Doing it correctly,
not 4
training a rookie.
megapixels,
Branson
just 4 pixels.
and the anti-upper was like, yeah, you dumb shit, you should have fucking learned.
You wanted to go around
just because I
and
didn't
take
go to
pictures of
college
things
didn't mean I didn't
and
fucking study.
determine automatically then whether these pictures were of solid, all white or all dark image,
weak force,
vertical line, or a diagonal line, or a horizontal line. This is tricky because you can't do this with simple rules about the brightness of pixels.
Yes, you can.
Both of these are horizontal lines. But if you tried to make a rule about
it's about the sensor, 8-bit clock, the gate slams.
You wouldn't be able to do
So
it.
when you get a solar cell and
so to do this with the neural network, you start by taking all of your inputs.
And you get
in this case, are 4
GPT-3
pixels,
to figure it out.
and you break them out into input neurons.
It would be by
you
value
assign
into
a
this.
number to
Yes.
each of these.
This is 0 and 1. This is also 0
and
1.
pixel.
This is also 0 1.
Plus 1 is all the way white.
But they mean
minus 1 is all the way black.
I usually
and then
use
gray
Bernoulli inside of this series.
Right
if and when this series.
So these values, once you have them broken out and listed
around,
like this on the input neurons, it's also called the input vector or array. It's just a list of numbers that represents your inputs right now. It's a useful notion to think about the receptive field of a neuron.
There's actually going to have to be a clean way to do it.
What set of inputs
I'm
makes the
talking
value
1
of
to
this neuron
this,
as high as it
and
can
this
possibly
has this,
be?
but it also has
For input neurons,
what I was
this
originally
is
talking
easy.
about for the program.
Each one
See,
is
the sensor's already
associated with
tripped.
just 1 pixel.
And that basically means
that
under
pixel
the
is all the way
grayscale
white.
of those standard
The
models,
value
there's still
of
singlet
that
states
input
of those
neuron
things,
is
and
as
they're
high as it
compressed
can go.
inside of a geometry that
The black and white
is
checkered
squared
areas show
circled to
pixels
this value.
that an input neuron
Bing,
doesn't care
bing,
about.
Bing,
If
bing.
they're all the way
Gotta go
white
through
or all the
here,
way black,
gotta go
it still
through
doesn't
here,
affect
I'll
the
come
value
around and put it
of
over
that
here.
input neuron at all. Now,
Lucky you
to build
hanging
a
down
neural
here, and it'd
network,
take me a while to get
we
here.
create a neuron. The first thing this does is it adds up all of the values of the input neurons.
You don't know.
So in this case, if we add up all of those values, we get a 0.5. Now to complicate things just a little bit,
I do, because it works big with the neural net. Like if I'm doing this and this with Salty playing Lou, and I'm doing this one playing Mike, Matthew, fucking whatever. Gabriel's got a good.
So for instance, if something has a weight of
Malignant's coming out, it's gonna be a great movie.
it's multiplied, and you get the negative of it, and that's added in. If something has a weight of 0, then it's effectively ignored.
Maybe that. I mean,
so here's what those weighted connections might
it's hard
look
to say
like.
anything is like you can't turn it all into time, or you can't turn it all into money. Like you gotta plan the money on time and frequencies and reciprocals for the landscape and map, because otherwise you're gonna get the bunny numbers all wrong and the pursuit
Graphically, it's
algorithm.
convenient to represent these weights
And
as
actually stabilizing.
white
Oh, that's the
being
real
positive
population of
weights,
rabbits in
black
there right
links
now, because
being
it's
negative
autonomously
weights.
running. I don't have to
And
go
the
out there
thickness
with
of
the chains
line
and
is
rails
roughly
every time to get a
proportional to the
census on it.
magnitude of the weight. Then, after you add the weighted input neurons, they get squashed. And I'll show you what that means.
Spaces. So
You
I
have a
figured out how to move the button.
sigmoid squashing function. Sigmoid just means S-shaped. And
Bernoulli.
what this does is you put a value in, let's say 0.5.
Well, luckily, I
and
do
you run
good
a vertical
against
line up
3B,
to your
1B.
sigmoid,
Well, he's
and then a
talking about this.
horizontal line over from
The
where
conversation
it crosses.
should be the same,
And
because
then
it's
where
my
that hits
same
the y-axis,
kill-
that's the output
kill
of your
button
function.
right here.
So in this case, slightly less than 0.5. It's pretty close.
in the back.
As your input number gets larger, your output number also gets larger, but more slowly. And eventually, no matter how big the number you put in, the answer is always less than 1. Similarly,
That's
when you
hot
go
round,
negative,
I bet.
the answer is always greater than -1. So this ensures that that neuron's value never gets outside of the range of plus
Come down here
1
and
to
argue with me
minus
about
1,
it.
which is helpful for keeping the computations in the
Get
neural
into that
network
conversation over
bounded
Here's what you
and
tell 'em. I'll
stable.
wrestle you for it if you got a problem with me. You know? I
So,
bet you don't have a
after
problem
you
being in
sum
charge
the
now.
weighted
dude.
values of the neurons, squash the result.
You're
you
gonna
get
wear the
output.
belt.
In
You're
this
gonna
case,
fucking like it.
746. That is a neuron. So we can call this, we can collapse all that down. And this is a neuron that does a weighted sum and squash the result. And now instead of just one of those,
The
assume you
autonomous,
have a whole bunch.
for what it
There are
does,
4
you want to know what it
shown
really
here,
looks like?
But
Piano
there could be
tiles.
400 or
Code
4 million.
bullet.
Now, to keep our picture clear,
Tile.
we'll assume for now
Tile
that
game.
the weights are either +1,
With
white
the
lines,
clicker. One,
-1, black lines, or 0, in which case they're missing entirely.
5-minute chess game.
But in actuality,
You lose.
all of these neurons that we created are each attached to all of the input neurons. And they all have some weight. between -1 and +1. When we create this first layer of our neural network, the receptive fields get more complex. For instance, here, each of those end up combining
when you say this is the sonar terminal, which we use deep learning
the receptive
for,
field,
all the deep lensing,
the pixel values
Einstein
that
cross,
make that first layer neuron as large as it can possibly be, look now like pairs of pixels, either all white
I was trying to tell
or
you.
a mixture of white and black.
And then Jesus got out there and he nailed into a cross. This one was hanging from the bleeding tree.
So for instance,
whoa,
this neuron here is attached to this input pixel, which is upper left, and this input pixel, which is lower left, and both of those weights are positive. So it combines the two of those, and that's its receptive field. Receptive field at this one plus the receptive field at this one. However, if we look at this neuron, it combines this pixel, upper right, and this pixel, lower right. It has a weight of -1 for the lower right pixel, so that means it's most active when this pixel is black. So here is its receptive field.
They don't mean anti each other. It doesn't mean like apple and pomegranate.
Now,
what it means,
we were careful of how we created that first layer,
pomegranate.
Its values look a lot
That's
like
what I do. You know, I'm the plantation over here.
We can turn right around and create another layer on top of it the exact same way, with the output of one layer being the input to the next layer. And we can repeat this 3 times or 7 times or 700 times.
Remember that little motorcycle game on Game Boy where they're like,
each time the receptive fields get even more complex. So you can see here, using the same logic, now they cover all of the pixels and more special arrangement of which are black and which are white. We can create another layer. Again, all of these neurons in one layer are connected to all of the neurons in the previous layer.
And then
but we're assuming here that most of those weights are 0 and not shown. It's not generally the case. So just to mix things up, we'll create a new layer, but if you notice our squashing function isn't there anymore. We have something new called a rectified linear unit. This is another popular neuron type. So
if you're going to do something like this, I need degrees, like,
and instead of
this
squashing,
is 29 degrees in science, okay.
I
can at least cheat the problem that way with neural net instead of doing hydrogen.
So if it is negative, you make the value 0. If it's positive, you keep the value. This is obviously very easy to compute, and it turns out to have very nice stability properties.
So what am I supposed to do with this technical math to burn it down? Technically,
so after like an assay test, because some of our weights are positive and some are negative, connecting to those rectified linear units, we get receptive fields and their opposites. You look at the patterns there. And then finally, when we've created as many layers with as many neurons as we want, we create an output layer. Here, we have 4 outputs that we're interested in. Is the image solid, vertical, diagonal, or horizontal?
Look at the glass. Down
so
wherever
to walk
the fuck
through
this
an example
is,
here of how this would work,
let's
say we start with this input
like it could be an animal, a person, M1, M2, MN.
Dark pixels
hydrogen.
On top, white on the bottom. As we propagate that to our input layer,
put the glass right there.
This is what those values would look like.
And then it's going to say,
top
well,
pixels,
I need to windage that a little bit. I need to deal with the curve
that to our
distance.
First layer,
I mean, between here to here on a straight line, it's straight
combination
line.
Of a dark
and here
pixel
it starts to, but that's
a light
this.
pixel,
With a banana,
summed together,
you're shooting it.
Get us 0.
Catch you on the next one.